Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good evening to everyone who's joined this chat, which is Let's Talk About COVID-19 Vaccines. This is Khairy Jamaluddin from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, also with the COVID Immunization Plan Task Force. And we have a panel of experts joining me today to discuss the rollout of the National COVID-19 Immunization Program, which, as you know, will start on the 26th. And the first batch of Pfizer vaccines will arrive on Sunday, on the 21st. So tonight, just a bit of housekeeping. Dr. Helmy Dr. Helmy from SERI will be moderating. He'll introduce the panel, and we will try to go on for about 90 minutes, if not more, if there are questions and if it's very exciting tonight. I've also said in Twitter that this is on the record for media organizations to report, so everyone on the panel is on the record. And the rest of the housekeeping, I will hand over to Helmy. Over to you, Dr. Helmy.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. As YB said, we are here today to talk about vaccines. I think there have been quite a few chat rooms over the past few days, just looking through Clubhouse, talking about various aspects of the vaccine. But we are quite lucky today because we have various individuals who have been involved in the procurements, in the decision-making, and eventually the dissemination of the vaccines in Malaysia. So I'll just do a quick round of who's here today. And as well, we all know who Khairy is, as he's introduced himself. We've also got Tan Sri Jemilah Mahmood, who is the advisor on public health to our Prime Minister. We have Dr. Kalai, he's the director for the Institute for Clinical Research. Dr. Akhmal, who is the CEO of the Clinical Research Malaysia, which is an institute under the Ministry of Health. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Giri, and he's an infectious disease physician over at Kota Kinabalu in Sabah. I'll be here wearing my hat as a respiratory physician, and really the plan today is to talk about the various aspects of vaccines, including the safety, the rollout plans, and anything that comes to mind. So I will get things rolling by getting the conversation started. And the idea is maybe in about 30 minutes, 45 minutes or so, I'll get folks to raise your hands. And what we can then do is get various feedback or questions from the floor so that we can then talk about stuff that people want to listen to as well. Now, the thing about vaccine is it's actually, to me, a bit of a scientific miracle because it's only been about a year and we've already got a working vaccine that has been introduced, not just, it's going to be introduced in Malaysia, but it's been introduced in various parts across the globe. And it's been a long journey. So I think the first thing to do really is to invite Khairy to speak again about the journey so far. You know, what's been going on so far? How did all this start? And what can we expect when the vaccine arrives on Sunday?
Thank you. Thanks, Helmy. Yeah, that's probably a good place for us to start, how this all started and where we find ourselves today. So around about April of last year, we had a first meeting, which was between the Ministry of Health, my ministry, as well as the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Wisma Putra. Then at that point, no vaccines had been approved. It was very early days, but we started hearing about the development of vaccines for COVID-19. So we decided to have a working group among the three ministries to reach out because we knew then that we did not have the capacity in Malaysia to develop end-to-end and manufacture human vaccines for human beings. So we knew at that point that we needed to move what I would call science diplomacy or vaccine diplomacy in reaching out to other countries as well as to reach out to manufacturers. And at this stage, there was nothing, no clinical data, nothing. So we got in touch. We got in touch with countries. We had bilateral discussions with countries like China, with the United States, with the United Kingdom. These were countries that we had some intelligence telling us that they were manufacturing vaccines and they would be among the first countries to cross the line first. Around about September or October, we started negotiating with the pharmaceutical companies. At this point, none of the interim clinical data had been published yet. So it was very much making bets. And there were some countries who were able to make big bets because they have greater financial resources than us. And you have to understand some of these vaccine contracts that the pharmaceutical companies prepare really ask you to lock in to what's called an advanced purchase agreement, where you put down money for something that has not even been approved or not even been fully manufactured. So around about the middle of last year, or towards the third quarter of last year, we were in this situation where we had to start making some educated guesses about which vaccines we would go for. It was around about this time that we set up the Vaccine Access Committee that is jointly chaired by Dr. Rajahram and myself, the health minister and myself. And under that committee, there's an expert working group that's chaired by Dr. Khairy, who's the director for the Institute of Clinical Research, and that's why he's on the call today. And that's where they started advising us about which ones to prioritize. And of course, then we started negotiating with Pfizer, we negotiated with AstraZeneca, with the COVAX facility, with some of the Chinese manufacturer, with Jemilah in Russia, and now we have a portfolio of vaccines. Fast forward to this week, the delivery of the first of the vaccines that we've procured, as I said, is from Pfizer. That comes on Sunday, and it will come in batches. Every 2 weeks, we will get a new batch from the factory in Perth in Belgium. And the other vaccines will come on stream after it receives approval from the regulatory agency NPRA. However, the Sinovac vaccine will arrive in bulk on the 27th of February for it to be finished here at the Pharmaniaga manufacturing facility.
That's quite a long journey, and what I feel is quite interesting is the whole concept of making educated guesses at a time when there were so many variables out there. Dr. Khairy, could you perhaps share with us how you came to make the decision of what type of vaccines to choose, and how did you come up with this portfolio of vaccines that we now have access to?
Thank you, Helmy. And thank you for the very kind introduction, YBKJ. And he's right to point out that under the committee chaired by both himself and the health minister, there are various subcommittees that look into many aspects of vaccine selection, as well as how the virus itself is behaving itself. Now, under this committee where the selection of vaccine is made, there are sort of many specialists and experts who sit in this committee, and they come from various aspects of the pathology that we need to understand about COVID-19, and also how vaccines are going to perform. So we have infectious disease specialists, we have public health specialists, pathologists, geriatricians, pediatricians, we have clinical research, and those come from ethics as well, from the pharma industry, and as well as independent people from the academia outside and inside of the government, private sector, and so on and so forth. So we've had a robust look at many of those clinical trials that come our way, and through that we are able to recognize some of those elements in the phase 1 and phase 2 trials that were published, and also look at the way the conduct of the phase 3 trials were being held. And one of the things that was happening around this time of this pandemic was the way the rolling reviews were happening, at least in the regulatory element. And some of those manufacturers and scientists made available much of their clinical trial data and also their protocol. So by just reviewing this for the early onset, we could look towards some of the better vaccines that were being developed. And certainly we could see the way the mRNA vaccine came forth towards the Q3 and Q4 of last year. We saw the inactivated vaccines being developed as well. We also saw the viral vector coming on board. And one of the things that we look forward to in all of their trials, and certainly these are interim kind of phase 3 results, but still valid enough to monitor, was their safety and the efficacy results they reported. And when you find that they have crossed a certain threshold of safety and efficacy, then certainly these vaccines can be considered, despite the fact that there was a bit of concern. They were still in the phase of the phase 3. But nevertheless, we are beginning to see their publications. They've seen how that there has been a very consistent information sharing between these developers and what has been published. And so on the portfolio that was selected, there was consensus based on certain criteria we set up. This criteria is based on 10 points that the WHO itself has set out to be, that is to meet at least a 50% efficacy threshold. So when we find a vaccine that meets this criteria and also these 10 points that are set by WHO, we could then look into the vaccine and look at the data and then bring this information to the joint committee for the presentation and for the committee to make further recommendations henceforth. So that would be the way that this committee has worked, and we do it weekly with the knowledge that the country requires an overview that is seen as independent as possible. Thank you very much, Helmy. Back to you.
Could I just clarify? So if you talk about an efficacy of 50%, does that mean for every 2 individuals who get vaccinated, one of them will be protected and the other one may not be?
Not quite the way that, of course, it's quite easy to interpret that way, but efficacy is based on how you would look into your trial design. Now, there's a difference between how you interpret efficacy versus sometimes what we call as effectiveness. But essentially, we look at what we say as the primary endpoints. Many of these trials were set up initially to look at no COVID symptoms at all. But of course, once you start to break it down into mild, moderate, and severe, then the efficacy varies. And depending on how the trial is designed, when you put all the 3 levels together, sometimes the efficacy looks to be very low. But essentially, the main point that we deliver from this vaccine is that it prevents severe form of the COVID, and certainly you don't want death to occur. And this is what most vaccines have done, and certainly we have seen that in the trial as well. You're right to point that a person who is vaccinated would have a 50% reduction of the symptoms versus someone who did not receive the vaccine or a placebo. This is how it is interpreted in a trial. But depending on how the major portion of these vaccines is eventually delivered, this efficacy value will certainly change. So in a controlled environment, we refer it to as an efficacy, like in a trial, but in the real world, we call it as effectiveness and how the vaccine really helps to contain the disease and the transmission. So that's how we need to interpret it.
So there is the studies that are being done from the companies last year, and then now that they are being introduced, we can also look at most studies with regards to how it's introduced in real life. Dr. Akhmal, is there any studies being done in Malaysia? Are there any studies that we've been involved in that could help us with regards to deciding which vaccines are best for us?
Hi, Helmy. Thank you so much for the question. I think most of all, we try to make sure that people understand that clinical research can be done in Malaysia with the beauty of Malaysia having the value proposition to offer the global community. Firstly, we are a multiracial country, and we have at least 1/3 of world genomics reside in the country. So these are some of the things that we go out and promote Malaysia, and through the engagement of the science diplomacy, we managed to get in touch with at least around 33 companies to discuss about COVID-19 vaccines, clinical research. And we are very grateful that there's one that is coming to our shore last month, starting with the Institute of Institute of Medicine's Chinese Academy of Medicine Science. And this is a very interesting clinical research which is looking into what we call as inactivated vaccines, and looking into 3,000 number of patients. And we are very grateful that our 9 centers that is conducting this clinical research has already recruited 2/3 of these numbers, and we are on the way to complete the study. Usually clinical research for vaccines are done in a multinational, multi-countries in terms of the clinical research. This goes as far as other therapeutic areas as well. But this is the largest number of clinical research in terms of recruitment in the country.
That's quite reassuring, and I think it goes back to what Khairy was saying about we have factories that are helping to fill up the vaccines. We have studies being done, so it's more than just about the procurement. Perhaps back to you, Khairy. I was just wondering, you mentioned, in fact, it's been mentioned a couple of times about vaccine diplomacy and science diplomacy. And I recall you having met I believe it was the science minister of China. I'm just curious as to, of all these interactions you've had, anyone were particularly difficult, or was anyone that was particularly easy to deal with? And where do you see this going down the line?
So the bilateral discussions that I've had with counterparts from other countries have been very, very constructive. And I must say that they try to be as helpful as possible. Now, we have to, of course, juxtapose this with what is actually happening in reality, which is that a lot of the rich countries have been cornering the vaccine supply. So you have Canada, for instance, that has bought enough vaccines to inoculate its citizens 5 times over. But of course, when we have bilateral discussions, it's all very constructive. But what I can see here is that there is also vaccine diplomacy from the big countries. So for instance, a lot of the Western countries, they don't have much say over their pharmaceutical companies. But for countries like Russia and China, and to some extent India as well, they use their vaccines right now as a form of soft power to gain influence over other countries. In that regard, our discussions with China and Russia and now India, of course, we are aware that this is a tool of diplomacy for them, but the government-to-government relationship that we've had and the discussions, the bilateral discussions that we've had, has certainly facilitated us securing supplies from Russia, for instance, the Sputnik V vaccine. Although that was carried out at a commercial level by Dual Pharma, which is a government-linked company, and the Jemilah Institute, the government-to-government link was very helpful. And similarly with some of the Chinese vaccines as well. And I think that many countries are using vaccines as a form of diplomacy today. So I think to answer the question, yes, it wasn't just about getting vaccines. There was a lot of diplomacy, and this extended to, for instance, getting our export authorization from the European Union, because recently the European Union has introduced export authorization requirements for vaccines. And you have to remember that although Pfizer is it's an American company, but our Pfizer vaccines for Asia Pacific, these vaccines are fulfilled out of, as I said, Belgium. So I've had to negotiate with the EU and with Belgium to ensure that Malaysia's advanced purchase agreement is honored by Pfizer and by the European Union as well.
Tan Sri Jemilah, how does this experience compare with countries across the globe? There seems to be a lot of headlines in various media about how some countries are doing better than others. And perhaps for Malaysia, some are criticizing that we are a bit too late, but some are also saying that actually we're pretty decent, considering there are still over 100 countries across the globe that have not received a single dose of a vaccine. Any comments on that?
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Helmy. I think that we are doing okay. Listen, South Korea was going to start vaccination the same day as Malaysia. So if you think about, how advanced South Korea is, how well it's done in its COVID response, I think, to be on the same level as a country like that, I think we're doing quite okay. But the worry, of course, is that, for us to really end the pandemic, we do need to have the mass population around the world vaccinated, and so far only about 1% of the population of the world is vaccinated. So I think, we have a long way to go. But for Malaysia, I think the good news is we are getting the vaccines and we are starting our vaccination program.
Great. You mentioned how it's important and it's an imperative for us to get things moving. Dr. Giri, perhaps you can take a step back for us and share with us, as an infectious disease physician, why the need for a vaccine, and how does it change the outcome of managing the patients that we see day in and day out?
Thank you, Helmy. Again, welcome to all to the Clubhouse. So essentially, if you just take a step back, the sort of epicenter for the third wave was Sabah itself. And from a clinical perspective, when you see patients and you see a number of ill patients that come into hospitals, you begin to realize COVID is just not a respiratory illness alone. All right. Predominantly, obviously, people talk about the respiratory complications from COVID, yes, but it's a multi-system illness. So you can get illnesses and complications in the heart. So you have patients who have inflammation of the heart or myocarditis. You have people coming in with myocardial infarction. And then you have people having embolus or clots that migrate into the lungs, causing pulmonary embolisms. Then the whole aspect of the neurological complications post-COVID, the strokes, that means blood clots in the brain, fuzziness, delirium that is caused by COVID itself. And these are just the acute complications you see from COVID. And there's the whole other component of long COVID, which people are beginning to recognize as an entity. And I'm sure, Helmy, in your practice in respiratory medicine, you see a lot of them. So what we realize is COVID is just not limited to the lung. Number one, people get ill, and some people get very, very ill, requiring specialized hospital care. And the pathogenesis and also the whole experience of the illness itself is not completely understood. It's still a relatively new virus in human population. We don't fully understand the complications that it may cause, although there's better understanding now than 9 months and 1 year ago. So knowing this, vaccines obviously have come in the right time. They will be a game changer, but I think as a lot of public health practitioners would caution, it's just one piece in the bigger jigsaw puzzle. So vaccines are just one piece in the bigger jigsaw puzzle for us to get out into the other side eventually. And it's, at least from an infectious disease perspective, this is really, really exciting news. Over to you, Helmy.
Thank you.
Helmy, sorry,
Sure.
it's Khairy here. It's KJ here. Can I just jump in just to follow up on what Dr. Giri said just now, because I think he raised something very, very crucial. As the vaccines are about to arrive in Malaysia, we are starting to hear a lot of vaccine hesitancy. A lot of it comes from, of course, anti-vaxxers, but there are reasonable people who are saying that, look, because the mortality rate of COVID in Malaysia is so low, we don't need to take the vaccine because, most of us will probably be asymptomatic carriers anyway. But I want to pick up on what Dr. Giri said, because as a policymaker, when he touched on long COVID, which is the long-term effects of COVID on somebody who has been infected, I think that really is something scary. And it says to me, you don't want to get COVID at all. Just because the mortality rate is low, it doesn't mean that it's okay to get COVID. Therefore, you need to protect yourself. And the best way to protect yourself is by vaccinating and receiving the vaccine. I don't know if Dr. Giri wants to touch on that.
Absolutely, Minister Khairy. So we know from studies, people who just asymptomatic from COVID, and this is early experience from China and eventually replicated at other places in the world. If you just did CT scans, that means very specialized scans of the lung, there are changes which are reflected in lung. These are people who are young, who are healthy, who are otherwise asymptomatic. So this disease goes beyond just people who are symptomatic and who have manifestations which land you up in ICUs or in critical care. So I think it's important that you brought up the point again that long COVID is an issue that people are just now beginning to understand. For example, I'll let you know, in patients we see in ICU who even eventually get better, that their lungs have been damaged so extensively that eventually we think they're going to probably be ending up with long-term complications in the lung and perhaps reflected in the heart as well. So there are a lot of the unknowns, so to speak. We have come very far in the science of the disease itself, but there's so much more for us to learn. And as I mentioned just now, it's a new virus. We are learning as we speak. And every day we're learning something new about the virus. And this vaccines that we have is nothing short of a miracle, as Helmy pointed out just now, coming to a vaccine within a year of a pandemic has never happened before. And science delivered. It's up to us now to sort of make sure that we get the vaccines into arms and we get as much people protected.
Helmy, can I jump in a minute?
Sure.
Yeah, I think I want to build on what Dr. Giri said. I think it's not, it is true that there are people who will get what we call the long COVID symptoms that he described. But let's also look at, the populations at risk. We've seen today, for example, the highest number of deaths, and most of them were people who were in the older age group, the people with comorbidities. And I think it's really important to remember that even if you're well, you will be, with family members who are extremely high risk, and you've got to protect yourself to be able to protect others. And right now in the West, there's increasing reports of young children having very severe symptoms and very, very bizarre symptoms as well, not like the usual adult ones that are lung, respiratory in nature, but more on neurological and so forth. So as Dr. Giri pointed out, we are dealing with a virus that is behaving in a very unusual way, and every day we're learning something new. We now have a vaccine that is effective and is efficacious towards, helping us come out of this. And I think that until and unless we also practice, our public health measures, take the vaccine, get to herd immunity, then I think we will be able to protect each other, not just ourselves.
Well said. That actually brings to mind a patient I saw recently. So we see patients at various stages of disease, but unfortunately, we are also increasingly seeing elderly patients who have never left their houses being brought in with a positive test because of contact with children or carers or loved ones who are visiting them. So you may have, once again, a majority of individuals who may not have any symptoms whatsoever, but then you can pass it on to susceptible individuals. And I even have a friend who is pregnant and unfortunately had COVID, and as a consequence of that had a mini stroke. And this is someone who is roughly my age, and then, I like to think I'm not that old, but it just gives me that it just drives in the point that everyone is at risk. Granted, most of us will hopefully be asymptomatic, but the point of prevention, the point of vaccination is to not just help ourselves, but to help the people around us. Now, a quick welcome again to everyone who's joined us. We have got about, let me have a look, 3,000 folks actually. And that's something else that would have never have happened 1 year ago, 3,000 people spending a Friday night listening to people talk about vaccines. So it's a good sign, I would hope. And what I would like to remind everyone is in about 15, 20 minutes or so, I'll open the floor for questions. But next, I would like to perhaps invite someone on the panel to perhaps talk a little bit more about safety concerns with regards to the vaccine, because it's obviously one of the more common questions that come up. Things like mRNA, is it safe? Is it going to change our DNA? Is there going to be any adverse side effects, and what can be done to prevent those? Any takers for these questions?
I think Dr. Kalai and Dr. Akhmal can take that.
Go for it.
Hi, Helmy. Maybe I go first, and then Dr. Kalai will be explaining more. Before I go there, I think we are dealing with a different virus at the moment, which gives a creeps in you because it acts in so many organs, and the pathogenesis, what we call as the understanding of the infection itself, is still new, and worse that we know that it affects in multi-organ, and this is because of the receptors that they work on, which is available in any organ in the body. Now, this is where vaccine is very important to be part of the public health system to address the issues with regards to reinfection, especially for those that you love one and the elderly and those who are in the what we call as at risk. Now, coming back to the safety of the clinical research, every clinical research is designed in a way not only to address the efficacy through the neutralizing antibody or the number of the T helper cells that will be produced, but it also address the safety of the patient itself, and those what we call as volunteers that enroll in clinical research, thank them. That's how we get a better understanding of each particular vaccines, and take mRNA for that matter. The technology was being developed many years ago, and when it comes to this time when we understand well that the mRNA vaccine is about changing the messenger of the RNA sitting in the ribosomes that helped to change the way how the body react to the development of the immune system. So back to the safety itself, not only the mRNA studies, but any other studies that looking into the new vaccines or the old vaccines for that matter, are looking into the safety reporting, whether you are in the what we call as moderate, severe, or mild diseases. This is very important because we grade this safety reporting through whether they are severe, they are mild, in terms of grading of grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. But most important thing is that to see how tolerable this vaccine is in the group of population. And that's how we understand that the vaccines, well, we can't say that 100% safe, but it is tolerable to the human mankind. And that's why companies like Pfizer, like AstraZeneca, and the rest that has been mentioned in this program are confident to market their product and to register it for use in their public health.
Dr. Kalai, if there was a patient in front of you who said, I'm just scared about this vaccine, I'm scared I might get some sort of side effects, what would you say to that patient?
Thank you, Helmy, again. I think to follow up on what Dr. Akhmal has said, I think there are enough evidence from the preclinical studies and the clinical trials itself to hint that there is hardly any ever death reported in this particular trials that is directly related to any of the vaccines. That's very reassuring in the sense that in all the trials that has been reported, of course, there are incidental death in any trial, not necessarily only in a vaccine trial, but the main consideration always is causality. And we did not see that in these trials and all the trials that has been reported as far as causality. So that is a very reassuring element. In terms of side effects, I think many of these side effects are expected as what we tend to experience with many other vaccinations. They tend to be very local. Many of them tend to, of course, report local side pain. They tend to have some redness. And some of those individuals also reported the skin looking a little bit rash, otherwise looking a bit more puffy than normal. But overall, many of them, of course, reported some form of systemic changes. And these are typical of most vaccines anyway. They feel a bit tired or fatigue, sometimes, of course, accompanied by headache. And when you have fever and responding to the vaccine, chills tend to follow. But these are almost always expected. So as far as safety is concerned, the vaccines that are made available now are very, very safe. And this we have seen even in the rollout where millions of doses have been administered to people, and we have yet to see these red flags for all sort of worries, except perhaps, of course, anaphylaxis. Now that is, of course, now recognized as a contraindication for those with previous history of anaphylaxis, because that has become obvious in the rollout of these vaccines. This in a trial, of course, we do not have the benefit of millions of doses, but these are the sort of things that the pharmacovigilance and the surveillance that follows in the vaccination will highlight. And thus far, the vaccines have gone really well on the ground level. We have seen reduction of disease, at least in those who have received the vaccines. We're seeing data coming out from some of the countries with advanced vaccination of their population. Particularly the elderly folks are seeing lesser of the severe disease and hospitalization. So that's very, very encouraging. And let's bear in mind, these are vulnerable population. They're considered elderly. Even in many other countries, you realize that they started with the most aged population, 80s and 90s, and they've worked themselves downwards to about 60. So if we find that these groups are relatively not impacted by the side effects that we are always hearing in the mass media or the social media, then you can be assured that a person in front of me will be assured likewise. Thank you. Back to you, Helmy.
Maybe one additional fact that when a product is marketed or vaccine is marketed or used in the members of the public, there are a system what we call as pharmacovigilance that actually monitor the effect of the patients or any adverse reaction, any side effects that needs to be reporting. And all these data are captured in a central body in Malaysia, which is called MedReg. In a long way to say, it is the Malaysian Adverse Drug Reaction Committee. And this committee will receive all these complaints, all these side effect, reporting, to be understand and studied to make sure that there is no new unexpected reaction that we see in the vaccine. So to put all in a nutshell, even though the vaccine is marketed and used, there are a system of pharmacovigilance that monitor the safety of the vaccine in the general public.
Helmy, can I build on that, please? There's a wonderful vaccine tracker. I'm sure many of you may be following on Bloomberg. And today, there are 193 million doses that have been administered across 87 countries. And that's roughly about 6.5 million doses a day. And that's incredible. And we would hear, if there were serious adverse effects that, have arisen, but that's a large number of vaccines that have been given. I'm thinking back about, when we first had the smallpox vaccine. The ones who are young in this room will not know because they probably never had one, but I've had the experience. But when it was first rolled out in the UK, mothers were hiding the children up the chimneys because they were so scared of the smallpox vaccine because it was new. But, now it's eradicated. So what I'm saying is that, vaccines are a very essential tool in the armory of the public health system. And, with all this modern research done, and as Helmy mentioned at the start, about the miracle of these vaccines, the collaboration and scientists all coming together to build something, a number of vaccines that will be useful for all of us. So I think, we've got to put things into perspective. That's a large number already being rolled out.
I'm just going to add on something, Helmy, before I think Giri wants to say something as well. But, we've been watching this rollout throughout the world, as Dr. Jemilah said just now. So one benefit of not going first is that we get to see what's happening elsewhere. And we've heard news reporting of people fainting. There was a nurse who fainted when she got the first jab. There was news about some deaths in Norway in a elderly care home. And, I immediately will send a WhatsApp message to Dr. Kalai at odd hours of the night saying, what's going on here? And I think I'd like to get back to what he said just now. He always reassures me by saying that we need to establish causality. There might be incidental deaths, just naturally occurring mortality. For instance, in the Norway case, these were very frail, very old people who received the vaccines and may have passed on for other reasons, not directly linked to the vaccines. So causality is very important. And I think when we roll out the program in Malaysia, there will be people who inevitably have some adverse reaction. There will be adverse events, but we have to establish causality. Everybody or a lot of people are going to be saying that the adverse event is because of the vaccine. So somebody who gets sick will say it's because of the vaccine. Somebody who crashes his car will even say it's because of the vaccine. But I think it's very, very important to let the experts look into the cases during this case, or during the phase of surveillance of adverse effects following immunization, or AFI, to establish causality. But coming to my point, we discussed this at Cabinet, and we recognize that we have to reassure the public that in the rare event that there is a serious adverse effect, we have to provide something for the public, or for the person who's had that adverse event. Some countries have set up a vaccine injury scheme. In the UK, there is one. Singapore has just announced one. So Cabinet has agreed for us to come up with a COVID-19 vaccine injury scheme that will protect people, and that will provide for an ex gratia payment for people if it's found that there is a causal link between their serious injury and the COVID-19 vaccines. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Khairy. Maybe it's a good time to see if there are any raised hands. Let's get Izzati up.
Hi there, thank you for raising me up as a speaker. I guess my question, there's two of it. So the first one being, I'd like to get some clarification on what the NIP defines as essential workers. Considering that they are in the second group of the first phase, the vagueness of it all opens up room for potential abuse, which may lead to a breaking of public trust. So I understand that this group will be updated from time to time, but who does it refer to currently? My second question is with the technology involved. So given the potential endemicity of COVID-19, what is the government's current plan and capacity in developing an integrated health information system that cuts across the public and private sector to ensure a long-term COVID vaccine coverage? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're moving on to issues of dissemination now. So any takers for that?
Yeah, let me take the question about essential workers. We had a meeting of the CITF, the COVID implementation task force today. And we had a long discussion about the definition of essential workers, or rather frontliners. I wanted more granular detail from both the Ministry of Health and the other agencies as to what defines frontliners. So we have clarity and transparency, because this is an issue of prioritizing people. And I think the public deserves to understand what frontliners are. So for, I think, the medical frontliners, this is quite clear. These are people who are in the health sector, who are responsible for looking after patients in health facilities, looking after specimens, disinfecting facilities, looking at public health, field exercises. So we have about 300,000 what we would call pengurusan dan professional sektor kesehatan, which involves medical officers, which involves pharmacists, pegawai sains, and this also includes the paramedic and auxiliary staff of the health sector, which is nurses, medical assistants, X-ray assistants, ambulance drivers, cleaners at hospitals. So for the health sector, it's quite comprehensive, encompassing both the public healthcare system as well as large parts of the private healthcare system. For the other essential workers from the non-health sector, at the moment, we are looking at agencies who have personnel that deal with a lot of people at the front line. So the agencies that we have shortlisted for now are the police, the prisons department, the immigration, the fire and rescue services, RELA, the armed forces, as well as the National Welfare Department, because we have welfare officers going door to door delivering food baskets. So this is at the moment the list that we have for non-health essential workers. Now, I receive on a daily basis appeals from different groups to be included in the first round of vaccinations in phase 1 and to be included as essential workers as well. So I've had requests from, of course, the Ministry of Education for teachers to be included now that schools will be opened in March. I've had requests from places of worship saying that imams, priests, because they lead congregational prayers, they are exposed to a lot of people. I've had appeals from the transport sector, from cabin crews, from pilots, from people who are involved in shipping to be included as well. The issue we have now is supply, a shortage of supply. If we can get clearance from the regulatory bodies, from NPRA, to approve some of the other vaccines that are ready to come, for instance, Sinovac, Sputnik, then we can start including more in the list of essential services. But I want to also put out a caveat that in order for us to make a decision on these essential services, we have to run what is known as a risk assessment on all these groups to see how at risk they are in discharging their duties in being exposed to a COVID-19 infection. So at the moment, as I said, it's your police, your immigration, penjara, bomba, rela, tentera, and JKM, as well as the health sector. That will account for about 500,000, 500,000, which is our target. But again, the list will evolve from time to time as we perhaps get more vaccine supply on tap.
That's great. This reminds me of some of the questions I was asked before about the need to vaccinate non-Malaysians, and also whether or not there are issues of trust amongst non-documented foreign workers. Is this something that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I will be happy to comment on that. But I think there was a second part to the question from Izzati, which is quite an important one that I thought maybe Dr. Kalai or Dr. Akhmal will take. But do you want me to take your question first, or do you want them to answer her second part of a question?
Since I've got you ready, why don't you go ahead,
Okay.
and then we'll get Kalai, Dr. Kalai
Right.
to, yeah.
Great. So as I said earlier as well, we're not safe till everyone is safe. So I think let's acknowledge that we have a large migrant population here. We also have refugees, and they have also been infected by COVID-19. They're also at risk, and a lot of them are working, to serve the needs of all of us, working in the different industries that are important for our Malaysian, our lives to go on. So the government has announced that there will be, access to vaccines for all of them, and it will be free access, which I think is a really excellent move. Now, on the issue of undocumented migrants and perhaps even refugees, obviously there may be some apprehension, there may be fear, but as YB Khairy has announced recently, there was a decision also by the government that undocumented migrants will not be arrested if they come forward, and that we will find a way for them to then get documented and some amnesty provided to them. And I think this is very important. Now, having said that, if I was an undocumented migrant, I'd probably be very nervous if I saw someone like a policeman coming to take my registration. So this is where I think we need an all of society approach. What we're trying to do is also work with civil society organizations and agencies that have been working with them. UNHCR, IOM, some of these agencies know where they are. A lot of the civil society organizations know where they are. And I think we've got to go and talk to them, get them to speak to people who are familiar and have engaged with them as well. I think we've got to convince them to get the vaccine, because it is all for everyone's good that we do that. So, I think in our planning in the COVID task force, and there's a very significant attention being paid to making sure we have the right volunteers coming on board, getting civil society organizations on board as well.
Before perhaps Dr. Akhmal or Dr. Kalai takes the question on the integrated information system. What we're doing is we're building a back end to the COVID-19 immunization program. And this will be a huge database of essentially 23+ million people who we hope to vaccinate. together with details of which vaccines they've taken, and together with surveillance detail, because we're of course going to start following up on AEFI. In addition to this, there's also genomic surveillancing, because we will start doing genomic surveillancing on the infections to ensure that there are no mutations, no variants in Malaysia. So this huge back end will assist us and be shared with the private sector in the event that COVID is endemic. And a lot of people have said that herd immunity may not be possible, and that we are stuck with COVID-19. It will continue to mutate, it will continue to change, it will continue to find ways to be resistant to the vaccine response. And if it is endemic, then of course we will have this huge database that we can reach out to again, and of course follow on from the surveillance phase of the COVID-19 immunization program.
Dr. Kalai and Dr. Akhmal, would either one of you want to address the second part of Izzati's question?
Okay, Dr. Helmy, yeah, thank you. So perhaps I can just give a brief on it, because certainly I don't have the real insight into this integrated system. But what it does is it brings together the information on the disease status of, for example, as you now recognize, we now know there are positive cases, new cases being discharged, and there is those who are managed in ICU, and there's a report of death and so on and so forth. So this is updated on a daily basis, and certainly when the vaccine is rolled out, the information at the back end, as what our minister has said, is tied together with the rollout phase, so that the population is able to infer directly from this information system and keep up to date on the happenings about both the vaccines as well as the disease status of the country. So this is how the information system is to be rolled out during the pandemic status.
I can only comment on the application of the MySejahtera that actually capture the vaccination for every particular person. Apart from that, there is also the Bitcoin that actually technology that actually looking at what and when vaccine is delivered and to whom. But most important thing, it is
blockchain,
also
Dr. Akhmal.
Blockchain, yeah. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Bitcoin, you've been investing in Bitcoin, have you?
I beg your pardon. But having said that, there is also the what we call as a manual, recording of each particular person that received the vaccines. We are fortunate that we are not only relying on one particular vaccine. There are many other vaccines that is that we are procuring, and they are inclusive of 2 doses, single dose, and it suits in many types of people. For instance, those who may only come once and may not be able to come again, then they probably will be having a single dose vaccines. But like what Minister Khairy said earlier, it all depends on the supply. At the moment, the demand exceeds the supply of vaccine production in the world. And this is where the challenge is to get the vaccine in our shores. And we are very fortunate, very lucky. And I think there's a lot of works behind it to get the vaccine to arrive next Sunday.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there are so many stuff going on behind the scenes, but that's also why I suppose we're all here today to share some of that. I brought up Teacher Raj, who has raised his hand. Teacher Raj, would you mind asking the question as well as who you're addressing the question to? Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, YB, and esteemed physicians and experts. Actually, this question is to YB and also the experts. The first question is, by when do you think, is there a time frame that the government is setting by when all Malaysians will have access to the vaccine? Would that be 6, 12, or maybe within 24 months? But I also always get this question asked with the communities we work with in the B40. Is there a specific plan to reach out to the bottom 40%? Because many times they don't have access, let's say, to some of the hospitals or the information or the facilities where these vaccines will be available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teacher Raj, for the 2 questions. I always remind my team every day that vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. Buying the vaccines it wasn't that easy, but it was the easy part of all of this. Getting those vaccines into people's arms, now that's really where the game is, and that's really where we have to go beyond expectations and deliver for Malaysians. When will all Malaysians get access to vaccines? That's a tough question to answer because the supply is not something that we control. But if all goes to plan and we give speedy, expedited regulatory approvals without cutting corners, and the manufacturers are consistent with their delivery and stick to the delivery timeline in the contracts that we have signed with them, then I think we can get it all done by December. Now, in the book, of course, it gives a buffer of 2 months. It's 1 year up to February. It started off at 18 months, and PM said, no way, that's unacceptable. And we moved it to 12 months. But if the supply is uninterrupted and goes according to plan, then I think with the throughput that we are calculating at each vaccination center, reaching up to a peak of about 150 to 160,000 vaccinations per day, if that can happen, then we'll get this done by December or earlier. And that also depends on how we handle this on the ground, whether the vaccination centers are 24 hours, how much resources we throw at it. And that's something that we will continue to revise. Specific plans for B40? Absolutely. So part of the registration exercise is, of course, asking people to register. But we're not going to wait for people to register. We're actually going to have a massive outreach campaign, especially to marginalized communities, whether they are B40 or whether they're people who are in the interior areas, whether they are people who are from marginalized communities, like what Dr. Jemilah said just now, undocumented migrants. We have to go out there and reach out to them, educate them about the vaccines first, because that's the first issue that we want to get clear, that they need this to protect themselves and others, and then bring them out for registration. So we are thinking of things from empowering community leaders, empowering Ketua Kampung, empowering NGOs to go out there and to reach out in this mass outreach campaign to give confidence to these communities that the vaccines are safe and that they are absolutely essential to keeping everyone safe. And also, it's very important, vaccine equity is important. So how we design the vaccination centers or the immunization centers will also be very, very important, where we place them so that they're not too far from some of these communities. And if we can't we can't establish vaccination centers near them, how we deploy mobile vaccination units that DG Dr. Hisham said today to them. So I think one of the problems that the United States is facing, for instance, is vaccine equity. Those from the poorer communities are missing out on the vaccines. So how we design the immunization program, from the communications campaign, from the outreach, to where we establish these immunization centers will be very critical in us making sure that vaccine equity is a guiding principle in Malaysia's immunization program.
Helmy, if I may build on what YB Khairy has said, for Teacher Raj. Hi Raj, how are you? I think that we have a clear registry of the B40 in some of the ministries, so at least we are not starting from zero. The other point is that Malaysian Ministry of Health has a very good experience with mass vaccinations. It's and our health system is very experienced in managing vaccination. So, but in some communities, I think we will require, again, it's about partnership. It's with civil society, with with the private sector, with others who can actually reach. And as it was said just now, that even for example, people in the interior, we probably need to prioritize single dose vaccines for them rather than the 2-dose vaccine. So I think we've got to take all these situations, the context that people are living in, and then tailor the vaccination programs accordingly.
Thanks for that, Tan Sri. That actually brings us nicely to the 1 hour mark. So I do hope that you all are aware that there are plenty of raised hands. I'll try to go through them as many as possible with what time we have. But at some point afterwards, I'd also like to get the team to talk a little bit about the whole issue of anti-vaxxers, because we've been talking a lot about why we need vaccines and the importance and whatnot. But I think there's also a lot of misinformation out there that we need to address. Having said that, I'd like to invite Nadia to ask her question.
Thank you for allowing me to ask. So actually, along the veins about anti-vaxxers, I think one of the things that could incentivize people to take up the vaccines is by telling them, what they would gain from actually being vaccinated. So how will the policies actually change as more and more people in Malaysia get vaccinated? Will there be a clear framework communicated? So for example, once we hit 50% of the population vaccinated, maybe masks are only required on public transport. And if we hit 80%, perhaps we don't need quarantine anymore. Will there be a framework, and will this be communicated to the public? That's my first question. The second question is also around disinformation. And I think the major issue is that many Malaysians actually do not understand some of the science that's being discussed. So will we look at making basic life sciences education at least compulsory for students until up to the tertiary level? Because I think in this day and age, if you have a person who graduates from university, but they don't understand basic things about their own body, like DNA and mRNA, so can we really call them educated in the first place? Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia.
Yeah, I'll take that first question, since that's policy, and maybe the experts can come in later. As far as a framework of an exit policy is concerned, yes, we will want to communicate certain privileges or certain normalcy that can be restored once there's adequate or good coverage of the vaccination. However, this must be based on science. So the expert working group will continue to monitor what's happening in other countries to see whether or not we can dispense with non-pharmaceutical interventions like wearing of masks, like physical distancing, etc. But I think it has to be done on an equitable basis. There is talk now about, and I read an article in the New York Times just before coming on to Clubhouse, that there is a country which is considering privileges given to those who have been vaccinated and denying privileges to those who have not been vaccinated. Now, this raises a big ethical problem because, first of all, there will be those people who cannot be vaccinated because of underlying health conditions, people who are immunocompromised. The jury is still out on pregnant women. So you discriminate certain people. So if it is done equitably, in a sense that, guys, if we reach 80%, we can start having more privileges, we can start dispense with MCO, PKP. That is something that we are willing to consider. But again, it's early days. We still don't have enough data about whether the vaccines prevent transmission. We know that the vaccines are very effective in preventing the severe symptoms or outcomes of COVID-19. But as far as sterilizing immunity, we're not quite sure yet. So we'll continue to monitor. In fact, I had a conversation with the Singapore Foreign Minister yesterday, and they are still trying to understand how to open travel bubbles with other countries. They're not ready to do so yet because they're still monitoring the data, the effectiveness data from their immunization program.
Dr. Giri, do you have any thoughts with regards to the second part of the question about how we need to perhaps do a little bit more of education, both at schools or at the public level when it comes to science?
Thanks, Helmy, and thanks, I think it's Nadia, was it? I think it's a really good comment, and definitely as a sort of a medical practitioner, you would love the sciences to be delivered to a level when you're starting off from school and going up obviously to secondary school and then to universities. There should be at least some understanding of what has come out from the syllabus in school, and this hopefully is translated to adults being able to sort of understand the concepts, the basic concepts at least, when it comes to the life sciences which are involved. Taking on this opportunity, since I'm already here, I'll just perhaps for the benefit of the others who've not understood how the mRNA vaccines work. So it's basically a piece of the spike protein, which is a component of the coronavirus. It gets translated in the ribosome of the cell, which is in the cytoplasma, and this produces the component of the spike protein, which is then recognized by the human immune system, which produces antibody both the B cells and also T cells, and this sort of provides immunity to the virus if it comes along and if you are exposed to the virus later on. And I think there are a lot of people who always ask, would this sort of change my genetic composition? I think it's important to recognize the mRNA does not go into the nucleus where the DNA is stored. So there's absolutely no chance there's going to be change in genetic material for one person. And after the mRNA sort of does its job, it gets degraded and it's no more in the body. And the other thing that people often ask as well, would I get COVID from the vaccines itself? The answer is absolutely not, because the vaccines are making a component of the virus which is recognized by the immune system. It's not making the whole virus. So there's absolutely no chance you're going to get COVID from the vaccines itself. Thanks, and over to you, Helmy.
Perhaps while I've got you talking about vaccines, one question, Giri. There was a comment earlier about how there are increasing cases amongst children. And I think one of the common questions I've received is whether or not we should be introducing vaccinations to children at this stage. But I believe the studies are not too conclusive about that. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right, Helmy. So as we speak, there are studies ongoing for children above 12 years old. I think the Pfizer is conducting one, and AstraZeneca is conducting as well. So there will be data coming through for vaccination in children. But at least at the moment, the data we have at hand is for adults over 16 years old for the Pfizer vaccine and over 18 for everybody else.
Helmy, can I chime in on pregnancy and the vaccine?
Of course.
Yeah, I think that WHO and CDC have both removed pregnancy as a contraindication. What it does recommend is on a case-to-case basis that pregnant women can take the vaccine. And in the US, a lot of the nurses and healthcare workers who are pregnant have taken the vaccine. It was very interesting on a call that was actually chaired by Professor Adiba to Prof. Fauci, Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Becker from South Africa. They both concurred that, you know, pregnant women who were at risk of exposure of COVID-19 probably had more benefits taking the vaccine than not taking it.
Thanks, Tan Sri. Isaac, I've got you out. Please do ask your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helmy, for the opportunity. Thank you all the YBs as well, Tan Sri. I just have one quick question. There is vaccine hesitancy even among healthcare workers. And even there is a recent viral video from a doctor in the private sector spreading misinformation. I'd like to know from the panelist side, what is the role from the government and the policies that could be made to fight this misinformation, number one. And number two is whether or not the government is approaching key opinion leaders, celebrities, community leaders, and village heads to spread proper, correct information. And if a private company or these key opinion leaders wish to make videos for the government in bite-sized, digestible, simple information, where can they find those information? Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. Those sound like really good ideas.
Yeah, so maybe Dr. Jemilah will take the first part of the question, which is what we can do with medical professionals who are blatantly spreading misinformation about the vaccines.
Exactly.
But on Isaac's second part, of course, we will be engaging, and we have been engaging key opinion leaders to do videos, to reach out to their communities and their stakeholders. A lot of this has been posted already. More of it will be posted. But as with anything, the negative trumps the positive. You're getting Charlene Zulkifli, Lee Chong-wei telling you to get the vaccine because it's safe. People look at that and say, meh, whatever. But you have, Dr. So-and-so or Ustaz so-and-so saying that, this vaccine is Illuminati, is a microchip, is going to control your mind. Everyone's going to watch that. So we are already disadvantaged. It's an asymmetric battle that we are facing right now. But I welcome Isaac's suggestion about wanting to self-generate content. And that's really the best way of doing this. We can do it in government, and we are doing it. But the most convincing stuff is really going to be user-generated content, especially when you guys get the vaccine, showing people that it's safe, saying that, you have absolute faith in science and the vaccines. And that's going to be the validation or a virtuous circle of validation once people start taking the vaccines. A lot of the information will be at vaccinecovid.gov.my, which is our official website, VAKSIN COVID.gov.my. Thank you.
Since you've mentioned me, YB, I think, Isaac, you raised some really, really good points there. I think the first thing we need to do is every time there's misinformation, we need to address it. I think all of us who are in the medical profession, have to take this on. We have to educate our constituencies, whether it's your patients, your families, and so on and so forth. I think on the Ministry of Health side, I must say I'm not familiar whether the Medical Act has actually has anything on misinformation, because, as you know, social media is new, whereas the Medical Act was 1971. But I think there are channels where I think the Ministry of Health is looking into it, how we can take a complaint up to MCMC and so on and so forth. But I think the responsibility also is for us to continue. For example, a few of us are doing, Professor Adiba, myself, a few women doctors have decided that we are going to set up this channel called Sense with Science, where we will tackle, some of these issues, whether it's misinformation or just getting people to understand why some non-pharmaceutical interventions are important. Why do you have some standard operating procedures? Because people see their standard operating procedures, but they don't understand why. So I think we've got to explain it using science and evidence. We have a room full of people here listening in. I think I appeal to all of you to really, work with us together, because it really is peer pressure, and it's really about, your circle of influence that is actually going to listen to you, not just the government. And I think that it's very important that we got to get to that 50% very, very quickly, right? So once we've hit that 50%, the struggle will be getting the additional 30%. So I think that's where we need to really think about, what aggressive tactics we will use to reach out to that next, 30% after 50%.
I just want to jump in on Dr. Jemilah's point just now, and this is a message appeal from me to doctors. If you see anybody, any licensed physician that's spewing absolute garbage about the vaccines, you can report them to the Malaysian Medical Council. That's the sort of aggressive peer pressure or peer action that we need in trying to combat these anti-vaxxers.
I was actually just about to suggest that, because as far as I'm concerned, any doctor who gives medical advice has a responsibility for what he or she says. And if you're giving advice that goes against science, that will basically end up with people making wrong choices, and as a consequence, their lives affected, then that goes against every single oath that a doctor can potentially, would have taken. So I think we are sometimes a little bit too nice. We sometimes give a bit too much of a platform for some of these individuals. And I know sometimes it can be a little bit, it has a potential to backfire, because if you look at some of these doctors or some of these individuals, they're now, going for the pity card. They're trying to say that their voices are being smothered. But once again, it's not about human rights in terms of freedom of speech. It's about ensuring that the right information goes out. And when you're a doctor or when you're a medical professional, I think you have a much higher burden of proof, and you need to shoulder that responsibility very, very carefully. I have got a couple of media folks who have raised their arms, and perhaps they would like to chip in when it comes to what we can do to address the issue of misinformation and disinformation. So let's bring up Tamina.
Hello, hi, Dr. Helmy. So,
hi there. Please go ahead.
So just a quick question, and building upon, of course, vaccine rollout being not mandatory, this is with regards to grassroots engagement of the faith-based variety. What I wanted to bring up is this. In my experience of covering anti-vaxxers in Malaysia over the last 5 years, the most fascinating insight from pediatricians, family health practitioners who've gone on the record is that anti-vax sentiment and resistance was highest amongst educated, upper middle class Malay Muslims due to halal concerns, as opposed to what is the common misnomer that it's actually rural folks. Also allow me to refer to a recent example. UK's vaccine rollout is being negatively impacted, especially Bradford currently, due to vaccine resistance amongst elderly of the Pakistani community of the Islamic faith. So with all of these factors coming into play, I love the fact that YBKJ also mentioned that there is ongoing engagement to reach out to particularly spiritual figures. I just wanted to brainstorm together with all the other panelists what more can be done to address this a lot more urgently, because this is going to hit us like a wave. Thank you.
Thanks.
Helmy, shall I say something?
Yeah, please. I was going to go ahead.
I think that's a really important point. It was just 2 nights ago, I was invited to speak to the British community about this because of this big challenge they have with the Bradford community. And Malaysia, fortunately, has the Fatwa Council that has deemed that the vaccine is halal and it is harus, which is encouraged. And in many countries around Asia as well, Indonesia and so on and so forth, they've come up with it. I think this fatwa is extremely important. The second thing is, the Minister of Religious Affairs has also been engaged, and to make sure that the Friday sermons, for example, will have, a snippet on talking about the importance of vaccine, because in Islam itself, it is a duty for every Muslim to actually protect mankind. So if you are taking the vaccine, you're actually conducting a duty.
I've been brought up.
Yeah. So, but I think
I'm gonna just jump in here, Dr. Jemilah. I think 2 points. One, somebody's mic is on. I think Sulin, your mic's on. Yeah, thanks. One, tonight, this is obviously a platform where I don't want to generalize, but I'm preaching to semi-converted as far as vaccines are concerned. Next week, I go to battle in the front lines, which is Facebook. I'm going to go on Facebook next week. I'm going to engage also with groups like Persatuan Pengguna Islam Malaysia. They have a big Facebook following, a lot of anti-vaxxers there, and I'll go to the lion's den and see if we can engage with the more rational voices there. The other thing, and this is half in jest, but not really, is by example. So rolling out the vaccination, we've identified politicians or elected representatives as part of the first phase, not immediately, but somewhere in phase 1. And I've said to the Minister of Religion, Dr. Zulkifli Al-Bakri, I said, Ustaz, you're going to be up very, very soon, because the moment people see him vaccinated, that's going to address quite a lot of concerns. So again, it's show and tell by creating that confidence.
Thanks, Khairy. Sulin, can I get you to ask your question?
Thanks, Helmy. I'm Sulin from Code Blue. I just have 2 questions for Minister KJ. The first one is, how many Pfizer doses are we getting every 2 weeks? Because if we are getting, say, millions every fortnight, then can we use up all the 300,000 plus doses in the first batch and then only give people the second dose from the next shipment? Because so many things can go wrong with logistics, right? And then the second question is, when is the national vaccination program recruiting GPs, nurses, and pharmacists from the private sector to be involved as vaccinators? Currently, MOH facilities are understaffed and overworked, and they still have to manage the outbreak itself with testing, quarantine, treatment. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sulin. So we have a schedule from Pfizer that they've asked for me not to announce it publicly. I have it right in front of me here because they want to make sure that they can really commit to the schedule that they've given us. I can give you broad strokes. So the first one's on the 21st of February. The second batch is on the 1st of March, 8th of March, 15th of March, 22nd of March. And by the 29th of March, we will have 1,350,000 doses of Pfizer. So you can do a guesstimate based on that. The batches are roughly similar in size. As far as the private healthcare sector is concerned, that conversation is ongoing right now. Obviously, we would like to use private hospitals, private clinics, the 3,000 general practitioners out there to augment the national immunization policy. But we have to really go down into detail to see which ones of these facilities can be part of the program. And that part of that is logistics as well. When you talk about the Pfizer vaccine, for the moment, it has a very strict storage condition of minus 80 degrees Celsius, although Pfizer has just submitted data into the FDA in the United States for a higher temperature storage threshold. But until then, we'll have to keep these in ultra low temperature freezers. So again, rolling it out to GPs, do they have the necessary infrastructure to store some of these vaccines? So we have to go into detail to see the capacity of the private healthcare provider, whether or not they can augment the national COVID-19 immunization program.
Can I just ask another question, Khairy? What kind of safeguards are there to mitigate vaccine wastage? Because presumably when it comes to logistics, to storage, there are lots of challenges there.
Yeah, so we've tried to build a just-in-time delivery system. So we have data analytics looking at the demand, the projected demand, which will be your registrations, and trying to match that with the delivery schedule to ensure that the vaccines are not stored too long. Whatever comes in from abroad, the imports of the vaccines are immediately deployed to the Pusat Simpanan vaccine, and from there they are deployed to the Pusat Pemberian vaccine or the immunization centers. So we're trying to create a just-in-time logistic system that looks at harmonizing the demand and the supply. On wastage at the immunization centers, this is something that Dr. Jemilah and I have been talking about for a long time. There will be attrition based on other countries. If you give 10 appointments, maybe 9 or 8 will show up, or even less, for whatever reasons. Once you've opened the vial, you have to use it within a short period of time. Otherwise, it will be wasted. And we've seen these wastages happen in other countries. So we're putting into place protocols in our vaccination centers to ensure that these extra doses, or doses for people who don't show up, are used. For instance, in immunization centers, there will be volunteers. There will be your police volunteers, your RELA volunteers, your military volunteers, your non-medical volunteers. So at the end of the day, if there are excess doses that haven't been used, we'll just get these guys and jab them. Or we will put out the word through social media saying that vaccination center X has some excess dose and you can walk in. And that's what they've done in some countries.
Thanks for that. Can I invite Kylie to ask your question?
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Hi, YB, Khairy, and everyone else on the panel has been really informative. So I'd like to ask a question that the timestamp is a little bit further into the future. Considering that the eventually we'll have enough infrastructure, enough vaccines, that at some point, let's assume all of Malaysia is already vaccinated, and there's a scenario where another version of COVID or a different type of disease happens. What kind of ideas or vision do we have to prepare for like the next wave? If we're thinking a bit further in the future, what kind of vision for that would put Malaysia at a advantageous position to be prepared for the next round?
Thank you.
Dr. Jam, you want to take?
Yeah, I would like to try to answer that. I think that's a very important question and something we need to think about very seriously. First of all, just to assure everyone that the vaccine manufacturers are not just, they didn't just produce the vaccines and they're going to sit back and watch. They're continually monitoring, testing, and as mutants or variants of the viruses mutate, then they will obviously have to adjust the vaccine so that it remains efficacious. So I think there's a continual process. I've been pushing with a bunch of other friends in the health fraternity that Malaysia and ASEAN writ large should be looking at, how do we have our own sort of ASEAN CDC? How do we become, leaders in our own right in the region? Because you would have seen that SARS and other diseases also emerged from this region as well. Or rather, we were early in being affected. I think Dr. Kalai has been in some of the meetings. There is now an ASEAN Public Health in Emergencies and Emerging Diseases sort of center being planned. And I think that the future is that we need to continue in vaccine research. We need to look into vaccine manufacturing in the region and at home. Thailand, for example, is one of those licensed to produce AstraZeneca vaccine. I think that, if we can have some regional collaboration, that a lot of these expertise and transfer of knowledge, so that there can be different producers of vaccines within the region as well. So I think that should be our aspiration, to be much more able to be proactive and rather than reactive. On that note, please let me plug in my favorite little topic, that COVID didn't emerge out of the blue, right? I mean, it emerged because of the the way that we have developed as a global development has really not protected planetary boundaries, the increase in zoonosis. So this pandemic was a question of when, not if. Singapore has already started planning about disease X, which WHO is also talking about. So I think we have to be prepared that there will be cycles of pandemics and other outbreaks that we'll be having to face.
One of the conditions, or one of the developments that came about from negotiating for the vaccine was local value add. So for some of the vaccines, like the Sinovac vaccine, the Sputnik V vaccine, part of the manufacturing will be done in Malaysia. For now, the fill finish, but hopefully more of the earlier stage of the vaccine manufacturing will be done in Malaysia. This is absolutely important because this will not be the last zoonotic pandemic that mankind will face. And we don't want to be in a situation at the next zoonotic pandemic to again try to procure vaccines from all over the world. So I think we've learned our lessons about vaccine capacity or manufacturing capacity in Malaysia. Some of the earlier initiatives didn't take off, but I think it is very, very important for us to look at a vaccine development roadmap for Malaysia to ensure that we have local capacity to manufacture and develop these vaccines in the future.
Perhaps sorry, go on.
So I could just add to what Waibi has said. Certainly the Institute for Medical Research, they have embarked on this vaccine work in trying to have the capacity to develop vaccines that are, what we call Malaysian, our expertise allowing vaccines to be developed. And certainly they're working together with the other institutes, the National Institute of Biotech, as well as the local universities in this endeavor. So it's going to be a long journey, certainly, but with the ability to work with external parties, at least with the vaccine technology being brought into our country, there'll be synergy to this effort by our own Institute of Medical Research. That'll be good for the future.
I echo what Dr. Kalai say. We preach in Clinical Research Malaysia to encourage our investigator to build that network with the international organization to learn and to also attract more clinical research with regards to new discovery, especially like developing of vaccines. But I think from the local point of view, I'm very happy to see there is cross functional activities between Ministry of Health, Ministry of Science, to the Genomic Institute to understand what are the new variants of COVID-19 virus in this case. And I think that will be a starting point. And on the international front, I like also to see universities or even Ministry of Health send experts or young buddies, young scientists to be trained in international centers like University of Pennsylvania, for that matter, the universities that actually nurture a lot of this mRNA technology. This is where our neighbors in Thailand are able to bring up some of the projects in Thailand and to work on their own compound. So I think it can be done. We have the brains to do it. We have the people, and what it needs is a lot of leadership to drive this to happen across not only multi-ministry but also internationally.
Dr. Giri, you're in the front line in more ways than one, given your background as an infectious disease physician. What would you say is your greatest fear when it comes to any potential future pandemics?
Thanks, Helmy. I think, to be honest, we are living in the era of pandemics. As Tan Sri has just mentioned just now, moving forward, pandemics are going to be when rather than ifs. We've almost built a perfect storm, so to speak, with land use change, the sort of bringing closer together the human-animal interface, and giving opportunities for spillover events to happen from animals to an intermediary or directly. And these are going to be norms of the future. So I think the preparation has to be made now. Moving forward, the capacity in all forms of the health infrastructure to prepare for the next pandemic, because in my opinion, it's just a matter of when the next pandemic is going to be.
And if there is one in the next few years, do you think Malaysia is at the right stage in terms of our preparedness?
Malaysia has had experience sort of managing spillover events and causing epidemics locally. If you just draw your attention perhaps about 20 years ago, from the Nipah virus experience, where there was a spillover event from fruit bats to sort of the animal reservoir in pigs, which caused a sort of a neurological sort of encephalitis, which is basically a inflammation of the brain in the local population. So Malaysia has had experience managing pandemics, or at least epidemics. So moving forward, I think this experience will serve us well. I think a lot of stakeholders have recognized in areas where we can improve, and there are areas we can improve, definitely. And I hope moving forward, we'll be in a much better position. And that's just not for Malaysia alone, it's to the whole world. Because in the era of air travel, it just takes one person coming on the plane to get a respiratory virus from, for example, in the depths of England to Malaysia.
I think I watched that movie. Yes.
Interesting you mentioned about Nipah virus, because the discovery of Nipah virus comes from our own scientists.
Yep, that's right, Dr. Akhmal.
Can I invite Haranish Karan to ask you a question?
Hi, thanks for inviting me to the stage. I've just got a question. I'm going to start with a few words on a preface just before I ask my question. Experts are saying out there that post-vaccination, like YB Khairy has said, it does protect against severe disease, but we're not sure whether it completely protects you from getting infected. So therefore, you can still transmit the virus onto other people. And again, the vaccine does not elicit protection until about a few days after that. So from a policy point of view, I can sort of foresee or envisage people, the public, sort of thinking that vaccinations will sort of prevent you from getting infections, and therefore they might not continue to adhere to new norm practices that are currently in place. This is maybe probably because of people just tired, pandemic fatigue. People are just tired of constantly being placed under restrictions, practicing restrictions, and of course that the misunderstanding that a vaccine is a silver bullet. So I just wanted to ask YB, Khairy, and perhaps the experts as well, what can we possibly do to sort of ensure that we don't sit on our haunches, but that we constantly remain vigilant, so that we can control this and continue moving forward?
Yeah, thanks. So as I said earlier, for now, the recommendation will be that non-pharmaceutical interventions continue. And we have to drive home this message through effective communication that you still need to practice these SOPs and even enforce them and reinforce this message, especially when the vaccines come out. I understand completely the psychological desire to want to just rip off your mask once you've been vaccinated. And I think it will be very, very important for us to continue to drive home the message that we don't know when we get to that sort of herd immunity, if ever. Until and unless we can safely say that there are enough people with an immune response with antibodies that SARS-CoV-2 cannot go and infect anybody else, then we will start saying that we can do away with non-pharmaceutical interventions, or unless there are no more cases for a sustained period. But I think Dr. Kalai can update us a little bit about some of the data that we're starting to see about how effective the vaccines are in preventing transmission. I think there's one country who is the world leader in vaccinations, unfortunately a country that cannot be named by me as a cabinet minister, but that country has published some data about the effectiveness of vaccines in preventing transmissions.
Sorry, thank you, YB, again. Yeah, on the issue of trying to reduce the use of masks and avoiding crowds and trying to go back to previous normality, the data shows that even after you're receiving your first shot of vaccine, you're still having some risk of getting the infection until, of course, the level of immunity renders the person less likely to become infected. So even among those who are receiving the first dose, they will have to adhere to this strict use of masks when they are in contact with close people. So that is important to recognize. Of course, in the long term, when there is a wider acceptance of vaccines, and what everyone seems to want to happen is the herd effect, where the transmission becomes contained and therefore the disease disappears from society, so that we can then have a semblance of normality and to socially interact as what has been in the past. But that is something that we all anticipate, and this is why vaccines are really necessary, because they prevent. Now, I understand that there's a lot of concern that people have a very mild infections, therefore, we may not need to get in the early part of getting vaccinated. But we have to understand that by only getting many people immune to this virus, we're able to contain the transmission. And this is what I can mention. The country is Israel. They have been in the forefront of their vaccination program. They started looking at the elderly folks who are most vulnerable to the infection. And we have seen in the rollout that their admissions for severe disease and certainly risk of death from hospitalization has reduced tremendously, so between 30 to 40% reduction. This is through follow-up of their cohorts where there were vaccinated population and those who have yet to receive the vaccination. So that is important. But also from our trials, we recognize some of the vaccines in which the recipients did self-swabbing. So they swabbed the nasal passage and had it tested. The vaccines do, of course, reduce the viral load. As to whether it does actually reduce asymptomatic transmission, this is still, the data is out there being collected, and the evidence will become clearer from all the vaccines that are being rolled out. So the message is that as more people get vaccinated, then you break the transmission, and that's how that we will achieve better control of the disease. So this is the way we look forward to the vaccination program. Thank you.
How does this impact the proposal of using vaccines to facilitate travel? There are chats or conversations and proposals about vaccine passports. Is it as simple as if I get a vaccine, I can then start traveling?
It's not as simple as that, because everyone is first respond differently to vaccines, and certainly the load of the virus one is exposed to also affects the way you get the illness. So currently there are trials to demonstrate, this is most recent from the UK, in which there are healthy volunteers being exposed. So this is the first kind of human challenge that one is being taken to see at what minimum dose of vaccine, the virus would induce an infection, so that they can understand the kinetics of infection and perhaps later how the vaccine interferes with that process. So the idea being vaccinated and to travel is not yet open yet, simply because we do not understand many other elements in the way that the disease is contained. But it gives an opportunity, nevertheless, for a better way to understand that travel becomes easier if we have that facility between countries. Of course, there are conversations on this, but to implement it still requires much scrutiny, and governments are working very hard to open up this channel, but vaccines certainly will help and facilitate this process.
Thank you, Dr. Kalai. Can I invite Mardia to ask you a question?
Hi, everyone. So basically, my question is a very basic question, but I think it's very pertinent to address this issue. What is the government doing to address the misconception from the public about vaccines from China and United States, specifically the Pfizer vaccine? Because somehow there seems to be this idea amongst laymen, myself included, that the China vaccine is not as good or as quality as the Pfizer vaccine. So how does the government plan to address this misconception? Thank you.
I think that's yours, Dr. Kalai. You're the expert that advises me on purchase.
Okay, so basically the way we look at vaccines is whether in the trial they prevented severe disease and certainly death. That is most important. There are vaccines in which you can have primary endpoints to even see if they develop mild symptoms. So of course, in the rollout of some of these trials, you see different efficacy values being announced. And certainly one of the vaccines from China seemed to be reported as being close to 50%. But we need to bear in mind that their trial conditions were very different. They targeted healthcare workers who are the highest risk of getting infection from COVID in their trial place in Brazil, versus many other trial centers that avoided the use of high-risk population. And as to whether the efficacy is non-comparable or otherwise, it's very difficult to interpret. But what we need to interpret always is that all these vaccines prevented one thing: death and serious illness. And in fact, almost all the 7 trials that we followed up showed the same effect. So in terms of comparison, there are different ways to interpret. And certainly if you look at the Pfizer vaccine, I'm sure the Moderna vaccine, they come above the 90% mark. And some of the other vaccines came with a different level, but they come from different platforms as well. So they function differently and the efficacy points are different. But all of these vaccines have a common denominator, which is that they're above the 50% mark set by the WHO, as well as by the US FDA. These are considered one of those international regulatory bodies, as well as reference points for us to use in accepting vaccines for pandemic situation. So this misconception and certainly the idea that we assign to numbers should be inferred by looking at whether they did reduce serious illness and death. In fact, this is what vaccines are meant to do. People do get vaccines. They may develop mild symptoms, but certainly you want to avoid the worst of the disease, which is severe illness and death. And all these vaccines, whether they come from China, Russia, India, and America, UK, we see the same narrative, which is that they prevent death and severe disease in COVID. And if you had the chance to listen to Dr. Giri earlier, there are many other unknowns that we don't see, even if you're asymptomatic. So those two gets covered by the vaccines. So we need to see in that perspective. Thank you very much.
Tan Sri Jemilah, do you have an idea, or perhaps can you enlighten us a little bit about the preparedness of our community when it comes to the vaccine?
Yeah, what I can share, I think it's essential for us to prepare the communities to be prepared for the vaccines, to better understand. I think we've had a few discussions before this as well, how our communications need to wrap up and so on and so forth. I think there's some basic steps we need to take. The first thing is to acknowledge that, you know, we make decisions about the people with the people. So we need to continually engage. You know, it's not just the government officials, every medical practitioner, everyone who's listening here, you know, we need to just keep doing that. And then the other thing, of course, is maintain and strengthen trust. And this is so important. And this is not just through formal, but also informal connections. I think the other thing is we've got to go back to science. We've got to use data for decision making, and we need to use that data for any form of course correction as well. And I always say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That planning must be also with the people. We've got to start this drumbeat together. We've got to manage the infodemic. We've got to really build skills, you know, in our volunteers, in our staff, in our trainings as well. And I think the last thing I would say is listen more and talk less. I think we've got to acknowledge that people are anxious, people are nervous, and that, you know, we need to get them to understand. The Ministry of Health did a survey, and they found that 67% of the people who responded to the survey were willing to take the vaccine. There was about equal amount, one half of which, the 16-17%, that were on the fence, a bit nervous, anxious, needed to know more, and then an equal amount who were basically the anti-vax group. We've got to get those, you know, 16-17% across. We've got to make sure they understand. We've got to allay the anxieties, and that can only happen when we can build trust, and we have, you know, people they trust telling them what they need to know as well.
Just add on to what Tan Sri said, I think I inadvertently left out that in our country too, we have regulation, and the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency, they too have the expertise to review all this data, the scientific data that comes in with the registration of these vaccines. So their authorization and approval is testament to the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. So I think that would be the way that we can articulate to the public the misconception of different vaccines from different countries. Once a regulatory approval is given, it is testament to the safety and efficacy, and also the quality of the vaccines that are made available to our Malaysian public. And thus far, if we accept you know, the day-to-day use of almost all the medications we take, this is how the NPRA ensures that what is given to the public is in fact safe and efficacious. So just to add on to the previous explanation, how we mitigate against this misconception.
Thanks, Dr. Kalai. We have about 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to invite Diana to ask her question.
Hello, Assalamualaikum dan selamat malam. Terima kasih beri saya peluang untuk tanya soalan. Soalan saya, ada negara yang akan beri pampasan kepada rakyatnya jika alami alahan, kecacatan atau kematian akibat vaksin COVID-19. Jadi, adakah Malaysia akan beri jaminan seperti begitu, atau jika tidak, mengapa? Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Diana. Seperti mana yang saya sebutkan tadi awal dalam perbincangan kita di Clubhouse tadi, Jemaah Menteri telah pun setuju untuk kita menubuhkan satu skim pampasan sekiranya berlaku apa-apa kesan sampingan yang serius daripada vaksin COVID-19. Tapi seperti mana yang saya sebutkan tadi, dia mesti dibuktikan bahawa ada kaitan secara langsung antara kesan sampingan yang serius tersebut dengan vaksin ataupun causality. Jadi jawapan ringkas, ya, Kabinet dah setuju dan kita sedang memperhalusi jumlah dan sebagainya dan kita akan umumkan dalam masa yang terdekat.
I think just to summarize quickly what we have discussed so far tonight, I think we've gone through the safety issues, we've gone through the fact that all studies so far with regards to the vaccines that are going to be made available have shown that it's something that works. There is a little bit of a difference when it comes to efficacy and effectiveness, but Dr. Kalai has gone through what those things actually mean. And I think the key thing here really is to talk about the comms and the plans that the government has in place to actually give this information to all the different sectors in as many different ways as possible. So I'll ask, or rather I invite Amir to ask his question. And Amir, please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me up to the stage. I've just got two questions. What are your thoughts on the varying efficacy data coming out of the Sinovac studies? That's the first question. And the second question is, do we get to pick which brand of vaccine we get? Thank you.
Before Dr. Kalai addresses the range of efficacy for Sinovac, and I think he has touched on it a little bit earlier, I wanted to answer the policy question. So the policy question is that the public will not be able to choose the vaccines. And this is the case in many other countries who have procured a portfolio of vaccines. And this is because, one, of course, it creates confusion if people can choose, and it creates possible points of bias and discrimination against certain vaccines. But a more crucial point here, and this is something that, an insight that I'd like to share while building this logistic system, is that it'll be a complete logistical nightmare. Imagine 23 million people being able to choose their vaccines. Say everybody chooses, an overwhelming number of people choose vaccine A, and that runs out quickly, or it's not, it doesn't jive with the delivery schedule. So that's really the practical reason why we cannot allow for people to pick their vaccines, and for us to reiterate the point that any vaccine that has been approved by the NPRA is safe and efficacious. Even ones with lower levels of efficacy, they will do the job once enough people are vaccinated.
Thank you, YB. So again, it is just to give a way of understanding some of those trial data. And for the Sinovac, they did their study in several countries. They used Brazil, Indonesia, and Turkey. And there's some work going on in Chile as well. Just to start with, in fact, Sinovac is already being rolled out in Indonesia and Turkey, Brazil, and of course in China. But in their trial, they first reported the outcome from Turkey, where they looked at about 7,000 of their trial participants, and they analyzed about 1,000 over of the participants for the efficacy, and they reported actually 91% for their Sinovac vaccine trial in Turkey. But when they went to the data that was published from Brazil, of course, everyone refers to the efficacy of 50.4% or 50.38%. But this essentially was against very mild to severe disease of COVID, meaning to take overall all the symptoms of COVID. But when you break down the symptoms according to severity, the Sinovac vaccine was 100% effective against severe COVID. So that figure is somehow buried in the narrative. So people kind of ignore that actually it prevented 100% severe COVID. Even in the Brazilian trial, almost all the healthcare workers were their trial participants. And this data came from over 9,000 volunteers in this trial. And if you look at the mild to severe COVID, the data was as high as 77%. So this is comparable to some of the other popular vaccines that are inferred in the way the efficacy is portrayed. So although we are bounded by what the trial data is published, but if you break it down, the vaccine is in fact very effective against severe COVID and certainly the mild to severe COVID. And that's what we want, isn't it not, from the way vaccine should work, which is to prevent our vulnerable population, particularly the elderly, against severe disease and death. And that is how the vaccine should be brought into the use. Certainly, hopefully with the review by our MPRA, we get to see some favorable opinion, hopefully, in the rollout of these vaccines as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kalai. And just like that, it's 4 minutes to 11. So I'd just like to get perhaps each speaker to give a short summary of the message or perhaps the last words they'd like to get across. Can I start with Dr. Akhmal?
I'll try in just 1 minute. I think clinical research that being conducted for the vaccines are pretty much involving a good number of population to show efficacy and safety. The most important thing is that all vaccines that will come into the country will be evaluated not only by Dr. Kalai's team in terms of the selection of the vaccines, but also our National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency, which has great experience and what we call as reputation in the world to select the right vaccine for registration and for the use of our population.
Thank you, Dr. Akhmal. Dr. Giri, would you like to add something?
Thanks, Helmy. Just a point. I often get this question: which vaccine would you take? Is there any differences within vaccine? I just want to tell this: I'll take any vaccine offered which is approved by the NPRA. So whichever that comes first and offered to me as a healthcare practitioner, I'll take it, and I think everyone else should do the same as well. Thank you.
Dr. Kalai?
Yeah, thank you, Helmy. I would wholeheartedly agree with what Giri is saying. I think we shouldn't actually hold out for the best vaccine. It's not going to be that way. We should just look at what is available and make what we call registrable in our country through our NPRA. And when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines, I think it's important that we Malaysians recognize time is of the most important factor. The fact that every day we let things happen without vaccination, we just increase the risk of getting infected. And bear in mind, young people too die from COVID. This is hardly, in fact, elderly disease-related condition. We have to recognize that too. But 20% are from the younger population. So it's important we get the best benefit of vaccination rather than waiting for the best vaccine to arrive. It's not worth waiting for that. Just get the vaccine that's approved. And all of us should be seen as Malaysians in getting this done for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kalai. Very well put. Can I invite Tan Sri Jemilah for your last words?
Thank you, Helmy. First of all, I agree with everything that's been said before. I just want to add that, we are only safe if everyone is safe. And I think, the fact that hopefully all of us listening in today will get the vaccine. But let's also ensure that we encourage others who may be worried or anxious to also get the vaccine, because we need to get to that herd immunity. As YB Khairy said, at the start, the vaccines don't save us; it's the vaccinations that will help us.
Thanks, Tan Sri. And last but not least, Khairy.
Yeah, first of all, before I wrap things up, I wanted to thank everyone who's joined the Clubhouse tonight. This is the first time I've hosted a discussion. I think at peak we had something like 3,000 plus listeners, and that's really encouraging. So thank you for taking time off on a Friday night to listen to a chat on vaccines and vaccinations. Thank you to the expert panel. When I decided to have this Clubhouse, I thought it would be good to have people that I'm working with in the committee, as well as frontline doctors like Dr. Giri, to join us to give their expert views, and to also reassure the public that policy is being decided based on sound scientific advice that we are listening to from the experts. I just want to wrap things up by echoing what Tan Sri Dr. Jemilah said, and that's really the slogan of the campaign. Lindung diri, lindung semua. Protect yourself to protect others. it's not just about taking the vaccination for yourself, but you're actually taking the vaccination for others. Nobody is safe until everyone is safe. When you take the vaccine, it's not just to prevent the worst outcome of COVID-19 for you, but it's to try to create a huge community of people who have the antibody response, who are trying to break the chain of infection so that we can end this pandemic. So it's really about not just yourself, it's about everyone else. So lindung diri, lindung semua. Please take the vaccines once the registration is open in March. And thank you to Helmy for an expert job in moderating tonight.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Just one last thing to say. As Khairy mentioned just now, there were over 3,000 folks today here on this platform. And I hope together we were able to clear doubts, and give very useful, insightful information that may clear rumors that you may or may not have heard. We all here have a part to play by ensuring that our friends, our families get the right pieces of information. And when we do share information about the vaccines, please do share the right positive type of information. There will always be doubts, there will always be more questions, but that's why we're here. And as Khairy mentioned just now as well, there will be a plan to go across multiple platforms to share these pieces of information. So together, I hope we all play our part to ensure that the right information is passed on. And this will, inshallah, help in terms of improving the confidence for our vaccine program. So with that, I'll wrap things up and thank you all for coming tonight. Have a good night and please stay safe.